Hello, and welcome to the We Get to Do This podcast. My name is Kaylee.
And I'm Jacob.
And we are your co-hosts.
In this show, we're going to dive into all things our lives, from our partnership to romance to entrepreneurship to growing our businesses together, our fitness journeys, and we're going to have a ton of different guests on that relate to what I just said in some way. We're hoping you enjoy the show, and if you do,
please feel free to follow us, leave us a 5-star review on wherever you listen to your podcasts, and enjoy.
And if you don't like the show, tough. Thank you.
Thanks. Episode 27. I'm excited.
27 episodes. Coming off our We Get to Do This event, too. First ever event. What'd you think of that?
That was so fun, but I want to talk about it at the end because it's probably going to be my We Get to Do This moment. But I guess we could start with that, too.
No, we could. You want to just dive right into this topic?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a good one for us to talk about and for our listeners to hear about too, because this is something that we both get talked to and asked about all the time.
And that is, drum roll please,
heart rate.
Yay.
Yeah. So anticlimactic. Yay.
Yay.
The crowd goes wild. Yay.
I got a text 2 days ago, and it was a client that they're on a long run. They texted me. Maybe you should just read the text out loud. It was something along the lines of like, how much should I be paying attention to heart rate while I'm running? I was on a run, and I think they had a 13-miler, and it started to drift a lot, and they ended up seeing it spike a lot during like the uphills specifically, and then towards the end it was way higher than it was when it started, right? And they were asking, how much should I be paying attention to this during like the season I'm in right now? Does it matter? You know, things like that. And then funny enough, someone else then brought it up in a run yesterday during the group run, right? And they were saying how during the group run they were talking about how they're always in zone 5 and upwards of 2 hours in zone 5 for runs, and how like they've always had their heart rate maxed out during runs and things like that. And got me thinking like I should do my community call this week on heart rate. And then today I was like, you know, it'd be great practice, Bae. What if we did the podcast on heart rate too and talked about heart rate and how it relates to running? Because I feel as though, you know, even I get confused sometimes on it. So when clients ask me questions, and a lot of times they get super technical, and it's like, yeah, it's always it depends, but I think heart rate can be pretty important. So I think it's gonna be a good topic. And do you want me to just kind of dive into like the notes I've wrote down? How do we
Let's dive in?
How do you want to go about doing this?
I mean,
is there anything specifically that you want to make sure that I cover, or do you want to like kind of ask questions as we're going?
well, for starters, if a new client is coming to you and is asking about heart rate and if it's important to look at and to be aware of and what their heart rate should be, what's your answer to that? Just from kind of a foundational... Sorry, I know it's a big question.
So you're
dive right in.
Your question is, should I look at heart rate when I'm running?
Yeah.
Essentially. And I think that it boils down to, everything is that it depends, right? But I think that the answer is, should I look at heart rate while I'm running, boils down to most times, yes. Yes, you should look at heart rate while you're running. However, it depends a lot on the type of like running period you are in my opinion. I'm going to say all of this is very opinionated today, based off what I have learned and people I have coached over the years. So just keep that in mind too. In my opinion, it depends on the season you're in. Are you base training? Are you in phase 3 of training? Are you in the middle of a race? If I'm in the middle of a race, and my heart rate's a little higher than normal, I'm probably not going to be thinking about it too much. I'm going to be really leaning on feel, right? If I'm in base training, I'm probably also not going to personally be looking at heart rate too much either, because it's probably going to be skewed, right? So I think a lot of it depends, and it's a good segue into kind of defining first what exactly, like, why does our heart rate go up in the first place, right? I think that the endurance world has been fun to watch over the past 5 years with the 80-20 rule specifically, right? 80% of running should be at a lower intensity. We talk about zones with heart rates, right? Zone 3 or lower usually, and then 20% should be higher than zone 3. It should be hard, right? You're hard and you're easy. And I think that kind of turned into, for better or worse, a lot of times with like run training, everyone just kind of fell into this category of, we're going to do running, and when it's easy, you may need to end up running at like a 15-minute mile pace to keep it truly easy, right? I've done that. I got injured doing that. I destroyed my IT band doing that. So again, not saying that that's not the right way to do it. It's more saying like it depends. So we're going to back up first, and we're going to define what exactly it means when your heart rate rises. And we talked about this. Do you know what exactly like is going on? Why does our body have a heart rate that goes up when certain things happen? What causes our heart rate to go up?
Put me on the spot. I mean, as you're expending more energy and you're trying to move faster, go faster, then your oxygenation needs go up. Because your heart needs to beat faster in order to produce energy output.
Yeah, more blood to the body. I think essentially your heart rate goes up when there's more stress involved, right? And stress can be anything from sprinting 100 meters, or it can be coming home to a dirty apartment, right?
That spikes my heart rate.
Right. So there's a lot of things that can spike our heart rate. It's not just the marathon, right? There's a lot of different things. So understanding first that why does our heart rate even go up in the first place? And then applying that to running. So you have that kind of baseline, because depending on who you are and your role with running, if it's wintertime versus summertime, understanding that your heart rate may go up for things other than just the run you're going on is going to be important, right? If you just had a super stressful day at work, your heart rate's probably going to be higher during your run. For a lot of times, people who run at night versus at first thing in the morning, their heart rate's probably going to be higher, typically, right? If you're sick, if you have more layers on, if it's negative 10 degrees outside in Minnesota, if you're overtraining, if you're undertraining, right? There's a lot of things that can spike it that have nothing to do with these zones,
yeah,
right?
If you didn't sleep well the night before, if you drank the night before.
Yeah.
It's all stress in your life.
Yeah, and this is just like heart rate beats. This isn't even we're not even going to touch heart rate variance, right? So I think that's important to understand first, is why is my heart rate going up in the first place? And holistically speaking, if I'm on a run and it goes up, is it the run that's causing it to go up specifically, or is it something within the run or outside of the run, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then I think kind of leading off of that is why, I get asked a lot of times then, why is it that while I'm running or while I'm expending energy, more stress, blah, 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 why is it then that the heart rate continues to slowly go over time, right? And the term for that is heart rate drift. And it's something that we talk about.
Heart rate drift.
Heart rate drift.
Okay.
Right, and it's something we talk about in the industry a lot. I feel like it's almost a buzzword a little bit. Usually trail and ultra runners look at it a little bit more than the road runners. This is what I see. But it's this premise that as you're running more, your heart rate will slowly go up and up and up and up and up and up over time, right? Even if you're doing like an easy effort, like if your easy mile was 10-minute mile pace, right? And you were running and like you're at like 135, 140, whatever heart rate, eventually you will hit a point where that will start to go up, right? That's heart rate drift. Fitness determines when the heart rate drift happens and the degree at which it happens, right? Which also kind of gets into zones a little bit, but that's another thing to understand is heart rate drift before zones, in my opinion. Why does it drift? Things like hydration, your temperature rises when you're running, you're getting more fatigued when you're running, right? You need more blood circulating through the body, through to the muscles, to the guts, to the brains, whatever is going on. Your heart rate's going to naturally go up. Okay, while this is specific to like endurance now. Okay, So I think that's the second thing that I want people to understand when we're talking about heart rate. Still make sense?
Makes sense.
Then we can get into the actual heart rate zones. And this is where it gets a little bit more technical, and I think that most people just start here and they go into why is my heart rate always in zone 4 or 5 when I'm running, right? And I think that once again, before you can kind of get into the heart rate zones and endurance, and this is why working with a coach is important, you kind of need to have a little bit of a grasp on energy systems. And I know that we talked about creatine last week. So this is this kind of reminds me of creatine a little bit. Now, some of you may understand why. I won't get into that. But you need to have an understanding of the energy systems in the first place, in my opinion. So what I'm talking about is there's 3 energy systems. You have ATP PC. That's usually your first 0 to 10 seconds. Think about that as like a high intensity all out sprint. It's no oxygen. It's completely anaerobic, like a max bench press, things like that, right? The very first energy system that is used. Then you have your glycolytic. That's your glucose. So the first one is, we're not getting into like the glucose side of things yet, right? The second one is now when your body is going to start using that as a fuel source, okay? The reason creatine is really cool and important is because creatine is used to create ATP in that first ATP PC. Adenosine triphosphate, phosphate, creatine cycle. And that one is, the second one, glycolytic, is usually from about 10 seconds to 2 minutes. That is your pure glucose, right? So that is a lot of times your track runners that are like the sprinters. Then the last one is your aerobic. It's 2 minutes plus. That is, now we're using oxygen, right? It's fat burning, things like that. And for the purposes of what we're talking about, I'm going to just say aerobic versus anaerobic systems. So the anaerobic systems are those first 2. Anaerobic systems are anything above 2 minutes, which is the endurance athlete. The reason I feel as though it's important to understand those and why I don't even use heart rate, especially in base training, is when you are building fitness as an athlete, you need to first become more fit, to be very blunt, right? The zones of the heart rate that we'll talk about shortly here, they don't, like, your body isn't going to really be able to recognize or pay attention to those a whole lot, or they're going to be very short if you are someone who hasn't worked out for a year, right? You're going to get off the couch and go for a run and your heart rate's just going to skyrocket immediately, right? You following me? It's going to be very hard. It doesn't really matter if you're running at your maximum pace, whatever that is, or if you're running relatively chill. It's going to be hard, right? Because your body is not used to that level of stress, and it's going to spike it and get you to a zone of a lot of glucose burning, a lot of less fat, a lot of less oxygen, right? It's going to feel very hard. You have to first kind of build the fitness up to be able to tolerate that, right?
So someone does jump off the couch, or they've just been, dabbling and running every once in a while, and their heart rate goes into the 170s, the 180s, but they want to start running, for example, but they're like, wow, like, is something wrong with me? Or even 200, maybe. How does someone build that fitness, and when should they be concerned if it's that high of a heart rate?
Think about it as the stress toll, again, that your body can handle. You want to create stress levels that your body can handle. Again, I'm talking specifically to running right now, right? Or exercise in general, right? We get into these cycles where maybe you take a year off from running and you were someone that was running 30 miles a week, and the third week back you do a 30-mile week, right? That's a lot for your body to handle. It's probably more than it can handle and recover from, right? So starting at a point in which it's minimal stress that your body can handle and respond to and build off of is typically the route I would go with that specific individual. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So instead
Follow
of
me?
saying, okay, my heart rate's in the 200s, I just shouldn't be running, or I have something wrong with me. Instead of looking at it like that, kind of developing more like consistency and starting out with lower miles, and instead of jumping to 20-30 miles, doing 4 to 5 days a week of shorter runs.
Yeah, exactly.
I know this is very specific, and again, where a coach comes into play, but just to generalize, it's all about building that base, right?
Exactly. And you know, think about it like in a weight room setting. If you just went into the weight room and after taking a year off, if you were lifting consistently and you took a year off and then you went back and tried to do one of the lifts you were doing consistently, that would probably mess you up for a week, right? If you hit your legs as hard as you maybe were, right? You might not be able to hit legs again for a week. Running's unique because you can theoretically keep running, right? Even if you haven't recovered from it.
What if, on the other end, someone says, okay, I'm not just jumping off my couch, and I feel like I have been training consistently, and I feel like I do have a good base, and I'm, maybe training for something, and I know we're going to get into this with the zones too, and they say, I'm still staying super high, and high to them could mean, 170s, 180s, 190s.
Yeah, I think again it depends, and I would need to see their program. So like I've had athletes, I'm thinking of one in particular that sees both of us actually, and he when he first came to me said these similar things. And I looked at the training plan that they were following, and I was kind of like, okay, well, hold on, let's take a step back, because it was a lot of things like maybe 1 mile, if that, 1 to 2 miles a day, and then like a 15-mile run on the weekend, right? And then, they're doing 20 miles a week, but the majority of that mileage is on one day. Or you have the situation where it's like, I'm going to do 5 miles on Tuesday, and I'm going to take 3 days off. I'm going to do 5 miles on Friday, I'm going to take 3 days off. I'm going to do 5 miles on Monday, whatever, right? And if your body isn't at the point where it can theoretically handle that, again, you're spiking the heart rate a ton. It's not even about these zones. You're just spiking the shit out of your heart rate, right? And to a point where you might be overexerting yourself. And the other thing to remember too is like that could work for one person, and it might not work for another person. It depends, like your age. What do you do for a profession? Are you on your feet all day? Like there's just
different times in your life.
Different times in your life, right?
Versus not.
I had at a conference the other weekend, the professor was talking about how walking for one person is very vigorous physical activity, and for another person it may not even be exercise. I should say vigorous exercise, and then for another person it may not even be exercise. So understanding too, like where you are on that journey is important.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, and what your goals are.
Right.
If your goal is just to maintain fitness, then
so the reason all this is important and how it relates to like seasons and whatnot, usually during base training season, let's think about it in that sense. I just came up, like I'm going through mine right now, right? And I have a lot of clients that are going through theirs right now. You go through a period where like, and I'm sure you've experienced this, every run kind of is hard, right? You take 2 weeks off and your running pace is 2 minutes slower than maybe that was easy before, right? And you're breathing hard. Everything feels hard. You're using different energy systems. You're using different zones than you were potentially a month ago, right? But you start at a zone, at a stress level that is tolerable, right? You maybe are doing, like you saw me, I was doing high rocks twice a week. I was just getting in shape, again, to handle the load that I wanted to put in my body. And then, over 8 weeks, all of a sudden, I'm back up to 40 miles a week. And it's like, how did you get there? It's like, well, I was doing 15-mile weeks for 3 weeks.
Yeah, and I think it's okay to acknowledge that we should have more down seasons.
Yeah, 100%.
You should be in a different place when you're racing and preparing for 5K, 10-mile, marathon, ultra, versus in the wintertime, it's okay to go at slower paces, and like you said, to not look at heart rate as much and to just start building that foundation, because we don't want to always be at our max speed all the time,
right?
Because that will cause burnout and injury,
right?
And that's what we're trying to avoid,
right?
So having those times, I mean, after your TC 10 mile, beginning of October, I didn't run that much until this past month, really. I mean, I was kind of doing some group runs, and yeah, when I started running again, things were harder to begin with, and now that I've started being on a more consistent plan again, things are getting easier. And I did look at my heart rate today after our 9-mile run, and I was like, wow, this is already getting better than when I first started, because it was. But I think it's hard because you can get down on yourself, because when you start up again, you do want to be at that same pace or that same heart rate. And I want to be at that same conversation pace as I was when I stopped a month or two ago. And that's just not realistic in reality. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that life is not about being at the same speed and pace for our entire life and throughout every single season. And going with that and realizing, like you said, if there's something stressful in your life, things are going to be different. If you have children, especially new kids, you're going to be running at different paces. And like you said, your heart rate is going to change dramatically based off of those things as well. And as you age, it's just what's going to happen. Sorry, side tangent.
No, I love it. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think it perfectly recaps everything we just talked about so far. So.
And accepting where you're at, because I know it's hard, but also acknowledging now we start building. I came off of this maybe off season, and now we start this consistent plan where we slowly start building, and we're not just like jumping back to where we were.
Yeah, I really think it boils down to, like, in my opinion, following a plan and being smart with the programming. There is a reason that people like myself and coaches and whatnot exist. Like, we spend a lot of hours figuring out how to train the body. I literally took a course called Program Design that was, like 20 hours in person of how do you write an effective program.
Yeah.
Right? And I've read numerous books on it. So, like, there's a lot of things that, again, it just depends. But zones 1 through 5, heart rate. If, assuming, again, everything kind of makes sense there, if not, reach out, honestly. Shoot me a DM and ask me questions, and I'm sure I didn't explain that perfectly. So if there's things that you need help with. But with the zones, with the energy systems, one last thing before we dive into what each zones mean. It is not cut and dry in terms of you go from one energy system or zone to the next, and you don't necessarily use the other energy systems. Here is what I mean by that. When you are running in a race and you want to pass someone, right? Kaylee, you're running Grandma's Half this June, and you see someone, your arch rival, whoever it is, someone just came to mind, and you want to pass them, right? Hit a little Sally McRae pass Gap Berry.
Pass Gap Berry, baby.
You will use a different energy system, and that is why you train those energy systems to pick it up, pass them, and then settle back in. You'll use a different energy system, or you'll potentially go into a different heart rate zone, right? That's why creatine is a fun little life hack. Or like a hill is another example of that, finishing hard in the race, the start of a race.
My fartleks are good workouts.
Fartleks are great workout, pickups and workouts. So keep that in mind. Anyways, though, transitioning, now, assuming everything is good there and you're ready to kind of dive into the zones, and you understand that these zones for like a professional athlete could be a lot larger than a lot of times us recreational athletes too. And what I mean by that is like zones 4 and 5 for the average recreational person is like minuscule, whereas like a professional 1500 runner, they probably have very different zone 4 and 5 levels, right? So keep that in mind too. Okay, so when we talk about heart rate zones, you can think about this. There'll be a chart in the PDF or a graph in the PDF that I'll attach. But you can think about this, if you use Garmin breaks this down really nicely into 5 zones. There's a white one, a blue one, a green one, an orange one, and a red one. They all correspond with zones 1 through 5 with your heart rate. Each zone represents a different percentage of your max heart rate and the different level of energy, essentially, stress, whatever, that you are exerting in each heart rate, right? If you don't know how to find your max heart rate, 220 minus your age. It's the kind of across the board rough estimate, or go get it tested by like a human powered health or something. 220 minus your age, roughly. So then all of these zones are percentages of that. Zone 1. When does it matter? What do you use it for? I took a lot of notes for this too. When do you use it, okay? So zone 1 is roughly 50 to 60% of the max heart rate. Think about this as like when you're walking, when you are doing potentially a warm-up or a cool-down. Again, depending on your fitness level. Someone might have zone 1 be walking, and another person could have zone 1 be a warm-up jog at 7-minute mile pace, right? Everyone's different, so remember that too. This is like your no stress zone. It's like the active recovery zone with running, cross training. Keep your heart rate super, super low. Theoretically, you're not adding a lot of stress. You can recover from it very fast. Zone 2 is 60 to 70% of your max heart rate. Garmin has this as your blue chart. Most of us endurance athletes, recreationally, completely skip this zone and we go right to the next zone when we're running, even though we think we're in this zone, or the white one even. I'm guilty of this. We all need to work on this. This is your true pure aerobic zone. You're likely only using fat, the macronutrient, to burn for your fuel energy here. And it's true conversational pace. Like you could sing a song, right? Things like that. It's building the engine of your car. So when you're on like a bike as well, you can get a lot of benefit for this zone and that type of thing too. Zone number 3. This is where we start blurring lines a little bit. All right. This is 70 to 80%. This is a lot of times, again, guilty of this, where a lot of us endurance athletes, we go straight to this zone when we think we're warming up or cooling down. And it's that 70, 80%. It could be blurring on like that gray zone of don't run in ever. Maybe it's like moderate effort. For your professional runners, it's probably true easy that they can recover from pretty quickly still. I like to think about this as this is the zone in which you incorporate / improve your endurance to run at faster paces. You improve your endurance to run at faster paces. It's your speed endurance, it's your strength running, it's your uncomfortably comfortable pacing, things like that, where a lot of times you can run it for a long time, maybe like an hour and 20 minutes, right? Maybe an hour 15, maybe even, it could be even like a marathon pace. Again, depending on who you are.
The more of like your threshold pace.
It's more of that thresholdy pace, but the threshold pace, so this is a good point. I could ask you, what do you mean by threshold? But that gets into a whole nother thing that we maybe shouldn't do right now. But you're probably referring to lactate threshold. The upper range of this is likely where lactate starts to become a little bit of an issue to clear, right? So
because we say threshold pace is in what you can run for about an hour.
Correct. But again, these are zones. So again, this is where it's important to understand what all those truly mean when people are like, oh, do a threshold run. You don't just have one pace that's the exact same pace across the board every single day of the week. That's your threshold pace. And again, what does threshold pace even mean? You know, if I asked 9 out of 10 coaches, or 10 coaches, 9 out of them probably wouldn't even be able to answer, like, what even is threshold? If you ask me what threshold means, I don't even know what you're asking most of the time, because there's numerous thresholds that our body goes through, right? Your lactate threshold, for example, there are 2 lactate thresholds. There's the point in which you start producing lactic acid, there's the point in which it's being produced, and then there's the point in which you can't clear any more of it. There's 2 lactate thresholds. What does that even mean? And then you get into like VO2, right? And that we're going to get into that in a little bit, so I don't want to confuse things actually. But it's just important to kind of think about, because again, we use these terms and like, what do they even mean? So zone 3, at the top of it, it's roughly where you're going to likely start getting some lactic acid in the blood and in the body. So you might start feeling like that slight, like warm, tingly-esque burning feeling in the legs a little bit, depending again on who you are. So this is usually, when we talk about 80-20, the zone that we spend too much time in. Usually it's the zone we spend too much time in. Zone 4. This is the start of it. And again, this is partly my opinion too, based off books I've read and different things. The start of this zone now is where lactic acid becomes an issue. You can't... I should rephrase that. Lactic acid is not your issue. It's the inability to clear it. That's the issue. Does that make sense? Follow what I'm saying there? Our body produces lactic acid as an energy. It has to produce lactate, right? Lactic acid is a byproduct. So when you are doing threshold lactic acid threshold runs, the reason that a coach will have you run a certain pace and they don't want you to go higher is because they are having you work on specifically sitting in a pace so that your body, from a physiological standpoint, can work on clearing that lactic acid. If you go higher or lower, you're not doing the assigned task, right? So zone 4 is roughly where that starts to happen. The upper spectrum of zone 4, again, where you look is going to change what I'm about to say. For me and my athletes, the upper spectrum of zone 4 is your VO2 max start line level, where you start getting into that specific energy, I shouldn't say energy system. VO2 max is the amount of oxygen your body can take in and use, essentially. Think about that. So it's where you start getting into that threshold line, right? Again, there's a max and a min, right? So this zone is roughly 80 to 90% of your max heart rate, and it's likely where you can get out 3 to 6 words, right? This is a zone that typically sucks to train, in my opinion. It's usually back to the energy systems, it's usually your pure glycolytic energy system, so most of us can only do this zone truly for about 2 minutes. Depending on your fitness level. Cole Hawker can probably rip this zone for 4 minutes, or the whole mile, right? But depending on your energy system or who you are, it's not just like we all have exactly 2 minutes. We're all different, right? So think about that. But it's usually around 2 minutes. So a lot of times you do workouts like 2 minutes on, and then you take 3-4 minutes to let all of that replenish. Working on your maximum amount of uptake in oxygen. It's like you're huffing and puffing a little bit now. All right, and then zone 5, this is going back to I spend 2 hours in zone 5 conversation that we were talking about earlier. You have I've had numerous people say this to me where they, I've been running for months now or whatever, and my heart rate's always showing zone 5, and it will do that upwards of an hour plus. If you are truly in zone 5 for an hour plus, you are probably going to have a heart attack before that hour hits. So, something to just keep in mind. Truly, if you actually are in your zone 5. Zone 5 is 90 to 100%. You are above VO2 max level now. This is your maximum. This is like getting into the ATP PC system. This is you maybe pick it up and sprint at the end of the race, right? It's 200 meter runners. It's your max bench. It's your power, speed. Think about it in that sense, right? It's maximum effort. This is you're not talking, right? You are madly focused on your breath. Following me? If you want to start thinking about how now to incorporate all of this into running, going back to the original question of should I worry about it? Should I be focused on how high my heart rate's going up during runs, etc.? There's a few things to kind of think about. Phil Maffetone is the guy. I found out he was a chiropractor, by the way, at the conference I was at 2 weeks ago. Funny enough. Phil Maffetone is one of the founding fathers of heart rate training in the endurance world, and he was a chiropractor. So it's pretty cool. He created similar to like the 220 minus the age to find your max heart rate. He created the 180 minus your age to find your aerobic zone. So you can think about that as when back to these zones 1 through 5. It's probably not, for the purpose of this podcast, we're going to say your aerobic zone is anything below zone 3, but you could argue that it's probably partially into zone 3 too. It probably is. So don't clickbait me here. It probably is. But for the purposes of this, we're going to talk about everything below zone 3 as aerobic. So 180 minus your age, whatever that number is. If you're 30, roughly 150, you should stay below. For the average endurance athlete, I recommend going that route first and thinking about every single run that I am doing is below that heart rate level, roughly. So if you are 50, it's 130. If you are 60, it's 120, right? If you're 20, it's 160. Then you can start going into, I'm actually going to fact check myself because I'm human and make sure that it's actually 180 minus age and not a different number. Whatever. If I'm wrong, I'm human. I'm tripping myself up now. But so think about it, 180 minus age, that's your aerobic line, and then anything above it is what you want to start doing for your hard efforts. All right? In the hard efforts, then that's where you start working on the type of speed zone you're going to want to increase or improve upon, the importance of each. Again, roughly, we just broke them down, but roughly it's either speed endurance, or you're working on how much oxygen your body can take in, or you're working on your mechanics, power development. Those are roughly the things at the end that we're working on in that 20%. For the purposes of what we're talking about today, it's not as important. So 80% of your runs should be below that threshold line, 20% should be above it. And again, remember that when you're doing that too, it depends on other factors that are going on in life.
Okay, so I'm a runner in my base building stage, and I'm 40 years old, and I'm always way above 140s heart rate. What would you tell me to do then?
Fair question. Okay.
That's not that high.
Yeah, so this is where, again, it gets so in the weeds, and a lot of it depends. Depending on who you ask, they're going to tell you should start doing either run walk, or you should start doing like slower running, things like that. There's a few different things I would consider if I were you. One, that formula is a formula. It doesn't take into account all the other things in our life, right? It doesn't know for sure what your actual max heart rate is. A 30-year-old that's like you, that has a job they like, that has social circles they like, that doesn't smoke, doesn't really drink, things like that, in my opinion, their max heart rate should be, even though, again, depending on who you ask, this isn't true, it should be a little bit higher than someone that maybe has a job they hate, doesn't ever work on their heart rate training, doesn't exercise, smokes, drinks, etc. Right? It doesn't really, those formulas don't take that into account, right? And it would say roughly even you and I have exactly the same heart rate zones. It doesn't take in gender, what we do differently, things like that, the different training levels, right? So that's something also to think about. So what I'm trying to say is that you might have a different max heart rate than another person, and using those zones, you know your body best. If you are running at 140 and you can talk and sing, it's probably slow aerobic, right? I wouldn't die hard on the zone training then, or your zone training might just be 10 different than the next person. Makes sense? I have Like for me, my marathon, the last marathon I did, it was like 170 to 180 my heart rate got up to. And I usually run high. But my max heart rate according to Garmin is like 205. So it makes sense. But you have someone else that has a max heart rate of 190, and then they see that I did my marathon at what I did, and they're like, oh, my marathon heart rate's always 140 to 150. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. Right? So it is very dependable on each person and understanding that.
How trustworthy is my device? If my device is telling me I'm constantly in zone 5, should I be concerned? Should I trust it? Is it actually calculating my heart rate correctly if I'm not wearing a heart rate monitor, for example?
So there's a few different things to remember with devices. Number one, there are some companies that, in my opinion, are a little better than others. Number two, if you can fit your finger underneath your watch while you're running, it's not even close to being accurate. It's not even close. Number three, all of these watches lag behind. So usually whatever it says at that specific moment is minutes prior, or at least a minute prior. Heart rate monitors are usually more accurate. But all of that being said, if you are consistently inaccurate with something, you can still get a lot of good data. Follow what I say, what I'm saying there? Catch what I'm spitting? So even if the heart rate tool maybe is 10 beats off, if you know your body and pay attention over time for like a month or a year, whatever, and you wear the same device and keep track of whatever, like you should know where your heart rate zones roughly are, right? So even if if you've been tracking on your watch and your aerobic zone is always like, sub 150 or whatever, and it's actually sub 160, right? That your watch is giving you a 150 and this whole time it's been 160, it doesn't really matter if you're staying aerobic anyways. Right.
Well, that's why I like thinking about the zones, is in, zone 1 and 2, you can sing and you can have a full conversation. Is it zone 3 where you were saying like you can get a few words out? Zone 4 or 5, you're not talking. You're expending all of your energy versus going off of purely numbers. Because those can be so different and varied from person to person and where you're at with your training, like you were saying.
Right. Yeah. And it depends on how technical you want to get with all these things. I have runners where you have two zones, easy, hard. It's either easy or it's hard. Some people never leave that zone, those two zones. Mm-hmm. Right? Depending on who you are. If you're the type of person that wants to just kind of run with friends a couple times a week and run hard every time, then yeah, maybe your watch does think you're in zone 4 or 5. You're not. You're likely not, right? But maybe your watch thinks that. That's fine. It should be hard. You're only running twice a week, and you're maybe doing 5 miles, 6 miles. It might be too much, So yeah, it just depends. If you want to get more into the nitty-gritty details of all the different zones and what they work, then yes, thinking about maybe your lactate threshold is roughly that. Maybe I can get 10 words out. Right? Again, what lactate threshold we're talking about, right? Your VO2 max is maybe a sentence max, 3 words probably. And then your sprinting and whatnot is you're not really talking. So you can think about it that way. And then aerobic is just you are conversational the whole time. We know the difference. A lot of times our ego gets in the way and we don't want to pay attention to it. But we know the difference. You know the difference. If you can't talk, it's not easy. It's probably getting into moderate. So.
Cool.
Heart rate.
Thanks for explaining all of that.
There is a lot that we went over. If you have any questions, please reach out. It's a very complicated subject, but hopefully I kept it.
Yeah, and very dependent on the person.
Simple.
But this is more generalized with also like specific examples, which I think can be helpful, because there are so many people that we've talked to that talk about how high their heart rate is. And also, just, we say this a lot, but this is also not medical advice. So if you are running in the 200s, we are not saying that you should just keep doing that and you're good to go, because we don't know your medical history, if you have a cardiac issue.
Certain medical thing too, and have your heart rate suppressed. That's keep that in mind as well.
This is just a general podcast.
But also, generally speaking, though, again, like if you are the person that is worried about their heart rate being too high, and like my watch is always saying I'm in zone 5 or max heart rate while running, but you're talking, again, you're not in that high of a zone then.
Yeah, and just take the time to be consistent with training and do lower miles more frequently maybe. And that's a great place to start.
Yeah. Run, walk.
Run, walk, do hills.
Hills
start
are great.
Practice, because on hills, your heart rate will spike more as you're going up a hill. And then as you go down and go on flats, your heart rate should come down.
Yeah.
So I think it's great practice to get into that higher zone, then lowering. Also, like the fartleks we talked about, also a great way to start training your heart rate to be able to handle different speeds.
Yeah.
Strides at the end of your runs, also great for spiking it and then coming back down and working on how fast can you recover.
Yeah. I think a lot of it just boils down to, and I'm comfortable saying this because of the demographic we both work with, I used to spend so much time trying to make running comfortable. And it wasn't until I became comfortable with running being uncomfortable that running became more comfortable.
Yeah, get comfortable with the uncomfortable.
And then start worrying about your heart rate zones. What's your We Get to Do This moment this week?
We had our first We Get to Do This community event yesterday, and we posted a reel on Instagram if you were not part of this event or want to see what we were up to. Jacob let me post Hot to Go by Chappelle Rowan, which was an exciting moment for me, but it was very appropriate because we did a group run and then a sauna event at Hotworks in Northeast. Shout out Hotworks for hosting this run, and we had an awesome group show up, and we had people who were sub-3 marathoners to people who are, maybe running less than a 5K. And everyone got along so well, and it was a very cohesive group, and it was very cool to see all those people show up and just want to be in community with one another and to just hang out. And it was very cool and just like a very humbling experience that we got to help facilitate all these humans coming together and just being two regular people with big goals and dreams and a passion for community and seeing people better themselves. And I was like, wow, we get to do this. Like, this is part of our jobs and our life. And how cool is that we get to help create these experiences for others and us. Like, we had a blast too. And just hanging out with a bunch of our friends. How lucky are we? What's your We Get to Do This?
Well, that's a good one.
Good luck.
I'll use a different one because you used that one. I had someone this week who you referred to me who had chronic back pain for
long time.
A few years at least. She's 30, right? 30. Somewhere around that. I honestly forget how it started, but it doesn't really matter. She had chronic back pain. And I always ask people when they come in to see me, how's your body feeling? And then if you are someone that currently has like pain or an injury or something, I say, what's the pain level at? 1 to 10. And working with her for 3 months now, and she's been putting in just consistent freaking work.
With acupuncture, strength training, running.
Yeah. And when she first saw me, it was like an 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, every single day, all the time. Just like constant pain. And then we got it down relatively quickly to sub 5 I think that was like within the first month for sure. And then it was 1 for a while. And I was like, I gotta get this to 0, right? That was what I was going for. And she came in this week and I asked her and she goes, I haven't thought about it since you asked me last week. So 0. And I was like, let's go. And just being able to, again, it's like, I don't know how the hell I got to this point. I'm just very lucky, So moments like that are what matter.
Yeah, getting people back to being able to do just regular daily movements.
Just bend over.
Yeah, bend over without collapsing to feed your dog. That was the goal. And to be able to do that and get them to running and coming to our events and not thinking about pain on a daily basis. I mean, if we want to talk about stress, it's one way to get rid of it, or to at least help it a lot.
Right.
You're awesome.
You're awesome. I'm just simply the messenger. Think like a monk. Check it out. Episode 27.
Thanks for listening, y'all. And like we said, reach out with individual questions, because there's always going to be different scenarios based off of each person. We appreciate you all. And thanks to everyone for coming to our event yesterday. And we'll definitely be having more. So keep listening to the pod, follow so you don't miss episodes, and follow our Instagram page so you can see when we're announcing these events as well. We get to do this. Episode 27. Adios.
Bye, everyone. Wow, Kaylee, we made it through another episode. What do you think?
We would love if you would go give us a follow, a 5-star review, and comment on the episode and what you liked and what you'd like to see more of.
See you next time.
We get to do this.